Hello there, and here we are on President 14, Franklin Pierce. Okay, hero of the Mexican-American War. We could say somewhat a war hero. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But this is Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce is famous for being, if not the one of the worst presidents that the United States has ever had, followed by James Buchanan, who is one of the, if not the worst president that the United States has ever had. These guys couldn't catch a break. Franklin Pierce. 14th president, born in 1804. Now, some interesting things. His father really believed in education and actually put him in a school where he had to stay over there. It was 12 miles away. He had to stay there for the week. Pierce hated it. And one day, on a Sunday, he left school grounds. He escaped, walked 12 miles to home. His father fed him dinner, put him on the carriage, and rode him back halfway back to the school, then made him walk back to the school in a thunderstorm. So parenting was very, very different back then, and Franklin Pierce said this was a turning point in his life. He got into the militia, became a general actually in the Mexican-American War. In the meantime, though, he was a very, very heavy drinker, an alcoholic, I would have to say. And what stopped him from drinking for a while? Well, he married a Jane Appleton when he was 30 years old. She was from the Calvinist religion, and Pierce actually stopped drinking. Once in a while, he'd fall off the wagon, but he started keeping steady. His wife kept him there. Now, his wife had emotional and psychological issues. I don't know what the psychological issues were, but he was a sickly woman. She's definitely suffered depression. She had some kind of lung ailment, possibly tuberculosis. But anyway, they got married. They had 3 sons. 2 of them died as infants, which actually hurt his wife psychologically even further, which of course it would hurt any one of us. So anyway, the he was didn't believe in slavery, but he found that the abolitionists, the ones that were fighting against slavery, were a nuisance. That they kind of prolonged things and they kind of hurt the cause. That they were like too extreme. He went to war. He went to fight in the Mexican-American War looking for glory. Now, this is what happened, though, while he was out there. He was riding on a horse, and he hit himself in the groin through the saddle so hard that he fell off his horse, and some felt that he fainted. They said he was a coward. But no, he was in a lot of pain. But that same night, he rode all night and went into battle the very next day, but this time he did faint out of pain. Um, so he was a war hero in a sense, and even other generals had said so. But at the same time, when he was running for president, people dug up these stories and called him a coward for this. This kind of plagued him. Anyway, he decides to run for president. He got into politics, and then decides to run for president. His wife, Jane, begged him not to run for president. She's a very dependent woman. She does not want him in politics, and she begs him, please do not run for president. He runs for president anyway, and he wins. And one day they're on the train, and they're on their way to Washington, D.C. He's going to his inauguration. And while they were on the train going to Washington, D.C., one of the cars of the train derailed. It fell off, and it rolled down an embankment. But everybody on the train, they were shook up and hurt, but everybody on the train survived except Franklin Pierce's 11-year-old remaining son, whose head was crushed and some say nearly decapitated. This happened in front of Franklin Pierce and his wife. That would freak anybody out and heavily, really, really traumatize anybody. And then Franklin Pierce's wife, Jane, especially, this was her only son. She lost 2. This is a third. Now he's dead. And it happened in an accident right in front of her when they're on a train going to Franklin Pierce's inauguration as president. Franklin Pierce must have felt very, very, very guilty over this. When they got to the White House, his wife did not attend the inauguration. In fact, she stayed upstairs in the White House on the 2nd floor for about 2 years. She wouldn't come down. And so Pierce had a very lonely, lonely time. What does he do? He starts drinking. I should actually mention that during the inauguration, there was actually snow. It looked very, very grim for this man. So he starts drinking again. During cabinet meetings and so on, he looked very, very sad and despondent, and I can't really blame him. But this was a very difficult time. The North and South divisions are getting more and more difficult. Franklin Pierce, though, wasn't doing anything. And it got so bad, and people started calling him either do nothing or traitor or other names or coward, that he's the first president to have a full-time bodyguard with him that was paid for by Congress. And this guy would, not the Secret Service we have today, one bodyguard was with him all the time. Did anything ever happen? Yes. Somebody threw a hard-boiled egg at Franklin Pierce one time, hit him in the head, a hard-boiled egg. The guy was actually arrested, but President Pierce did not press charges. Very important, Kansas, the Nebraska-Kansas Act, and it's going to lead into what we call Bleeding Kansas. What happened? President Pierce wanted to build a transcontinental railroad from Chicago all the way to California. If you're going to do this, you got to go through a lot of states and a lot of territories. And you got to please a lot of people. Now, he signed what we call the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which meant that any state that wanted to become a state of the United States could vote if they wanted to be free or slave. And he signed this. The problem with this is there was a compromise of 1820 that said anything under the 36th latitude in Missouri would be south. Sorry, anything south of the latitude would be slave, anything north would be free. But when you sign the Kansas-Nebraska Act stating that states could vote if they want to be free or slave, you nullify that old compromise. So people were very, very, very angry. Both sides were very, very angry. And then he was bitterly opposed by a lot of them. What happened though? Okay, Kansas decides to vote. Do they want to be slave owners, or do they want to be a free state? But from other states, they were sending people into Kansas. Southerners were sending people over there to vote. People that didn't even live in Kansas were going there to vote. And they were slave owners. So the vote came in, and Kansas was admitted as a slave state. Northerners, of course, were angry, but Southerners were rejoicing. But this is really vote fraud. You're getting people that are not even residents voting in Kansas. Well, Franklin Pierce decides to uphold that vote and says, okay, Kansas comes in as a slave state. So what happens? The people that believed in, they were against slavery, they were called free soil people, they formed what we call a shadow government. They said, no. This vote was a fraud. We form a shadow government. And violence broke out. I mean, people started attacking each other. Slave owners and people that didn't believe in slavery would attack each other. And violence broke out. To complicate things even further, remember the Fugitive Slave Act. That meant that if any slave ran away and went to the North was obligated to send that slave down south. Well, there was a slave named Anthony Burns. He escaped the South, went up north, and the Northerners said, we're not taking Anthony Burns back. He's staying here. He's staying free. Well, President Pierce sent militia, I think it was like 20 companies, to take Anthony Burns and force him back into the South and back to his slave master's hands. So this happened, and the Northerners were really angry. And not only that, but it proves that the Fugitive Slave Act is, you can't really uphold it, because if it's going to take you 20 military companies to bring down one slave, what about all the other slaves that escape? Okay, so anyway, violence had been breaking out in Kansas. It got so bad that in Congress, a senator, a free soiler senator named Charles Sumner, was attacked by another congressman named Preston Brooks, who was attacked with a cane and very, very viciously hit and hurt. Okay, by the time the election comes around, nobody liked Franklin Pierce. And then his party said, in a nutshell, anybody but Pierce. So the election comes along, and before the election comes along, his party didn't even nominate him to run for president again. They chose James Buchanan, who we're going to get to. But to make things worse, when the inauguration of James Buchanan came, you know, when there's an inauguration, you have the new president and the former president are in the inaugural parade at this time. Somebody forgot to pick up Franklin Pierce. And he was staying there in the White House waiting to get picked up. That parade was halfway over before they even remembered him. So they're going back after the inauguration. Franklin Pierce and his wife Jane are now leaving Washington. His wife was ecstatic. Finally, I can't get away from Washington. They're going to New Hampshire. New Hampshire didn't prepare a welcoming party for him. They just didn't like Pierce. So he goes back. A couple of years later, his wife dies. I had mentioned before, and I'll mention again, Franklin Pierce started drinking heavily throughout the presidential years, and he continued to do so. Some say he got very, very spiritual after his wife died. He became a widow. But then he did not support Abraham Lincoln when the Civil War broke out. Didn't support Lincoln. And unfortunately, Lincoln won. And then when Lincoln was assassinated, he didn't bring down his flag outside his house. He says he forgot, but a crowd formed outside and told him, bring down that flag. What's the matter with you? And he said, whoa, 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 calm down. I didn't know that the president had died. By this point, he had remarried. He was taking care of a sickly wife that he had. So anyway, he got away with that. But because of his heavy drinking, he died of cirrhosis of the liver. Now, was he a bad president? Yes, I'm sorry to say so. I mean, I feel sorry for all the tragedies he fell into. I have to mention that a lot of this is luck. I mean, if Abraham Lincoln had been president during peacetime, how would we consider him a great president, or would we consider him somebody like James Polk? Some presidents down the line that I mentioned that was very extremely successful, but there was no big drama like the Revolutionary War or Civil War or World War II or anything like that going on. So I think, and I also think luck has to do with it. What do you do if the North and South don't want to be together? Now, I forgot to mention that he was trying to get Cuba away from Spain. He was not successful. And the South blamed him for not being successful. So basically, this guy could not get a break. But okay, so now we're past Franklin Pierce, one of the worst presidents of the United States. Our next president is James Buchanan, one of the worst presidents of the United States. And following him comes Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. But in the meantime, until then, this is John Franquis. Comment below or subscribe. Thank you.